And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Monday, December 16th, 2024. We always start out with the sea ice, and the ice is regrowing here again along areas of the far north, especially down through the lower Chukchi Sea and south of the Bering Strait as we've seen a return of colder temperatures. Over a week ago or so, we had quite a surge of mild air come northward with readings giving above freezing all the way up to Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. But that milder air has since modified and pushed out. We have brisk polar easterlies continuing along areas of the Beaufort Sea coastline down in actually along areas of the entire west coast. So we do expect any openings here in the lower Chukchi Sea to begin to fill back in and then areas south of the Bering Strait that have some open water, we should start to see some new ice development here on the edge of it out of Norton Sound and around areas of St. Lawrence Island. Also in through areas of the southwest coast along the lower Yukon Delta. We're going to have to wait for this to begin to fill back in. That's starting to take place, but we have some rather brisk east winds that'll still be impacting Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay as we go through the day Tuesday. And also just in recent past couple of weeks, there's been some very mild temperatures come up into here. So what ice had initially established is going to have to regrow again with maybe a little bit, but not a whole lot that far south. So the low pressure situation late tonight, early on Tuesday morning, we have a 970 low here south of the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, a 964 low south of the Aleutians, and then another low way out west of the western Aleutians. By the time we get into Tuesday afternoon, the main low will be a 953 low south of the Aleutians, lifting northward. And then this low will be heading northeastward. This is what's going to bring snow to areas of the southern panhandle Tuesday evening through Wednesday afternoon. And snowfall amounts right now 3 to 7 inches, a winter weather advisory for this portion of the panhandle. Could be a little bit more toward Annette Island and areas along the British Columbia intercoastal mountains there as this system weakens. It's going to come northeastward and weaken, but nevertheless bringing more wintry weather. Then Wednesday, we find another low that's going to be coming out of the North Pacific. The initial one will be peeling off to the northeast and weakening, but then the next low will be lifting up toward the Gulf for the end of the week. Meanwhile, we have these two lows that just kind of dumbbell, kind of rotate around each other up through the Aleutians on Wednesday and into Thursday. So for Tuesday, winds are going to be brisk there, northern panhandle in the inner channels, Lynn Canal, north gales 35 knots, waves up to 10 feet, 30 knot north winds with waves up to 8 feet there around Stevens Passage, and then north southeasterly winds 25 knots, 7-foot waves there outside of Metlakatla. For the outer coast, 35 knot easterly gales off of Craig with 9-foot waves, and then generally easterly winds between 20 and 30 knots along the outer coastline there of the nearshore waters with waves of 8 to 10 feet. For Wednesday, look for northeast to north winds over the southern panhandle at 20 knots. As we go up along the outer coast, we're anticipating more of an easterly wind flow there along the nearshore waters all the way from Sitka off of Yakutat and Cape Suckling. Inner channels could see north winds 20 to 25 knots there. Chatham Strait and Stevens Passage on up toward Lynn Canal with waves of 6 to 7 feet. Brisk winds, we have 40 knot gales on Tuesday out of the northeast and east through middle lower Cook Inlet and outside of Kennedy Entrance there, northeast of Kodiak Island. Waves could be as high as 11 to 14, 15 feet there. Kennedy Entrance. Look for 30 to 35 knot easterly winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and along the Kenai coast. East winds 15 knots within Prince William Sound and 3-foot waves. Wednesday, those winds will come down. Prince William Sound, 10 knot northeasterly winds with 2-foot waves. And as we get down here outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, northeast winds 15 knots, 9-foot waves. Lower middle Cook Inlet down to lower Cook Inlet and outside of Kennedy Entrance, Barren Islands, we're looking at easterly winds 25 knots with waves 7 to 9 feet. Winds across the Alaska Peninsula Up into Kodiak Island on Tuesday will generally be east-southeast 30 to 35 knots with waves 10 to as high as 15, 16 feet on the North Pacific side and just southeast there of Kodiak Island. On the Bering side outside of Bristol Bay and north of Cold Bay, waves generally right around 8 feet. And then for Wednesday, we're still looking for generally easterly winds around Kodiak Island at 30 knots, and then east-southeast gales 40 knots off of Chicknick and Sand Point with waves 14 to 16 feet. On the Bering side outside there from Bristol Bay down to Cold Bay, look for east to southeast gales 35 to 40 knots with waves 8 to as high as 12 feet. Across the Aleutian chain, we're going to have one area of low pressure kind of circulating there. There'll be a couple of more kind of pinwheel up through there through midweek, but at least Tuesday, look for east-southeast winds across the eastern and central Aleutians around 25 knots. On the backside of the low, winds turn west and then northerly there at 20 to 25 knots. And then for Wednesday, eastern Aleutians will see easterly winds of 30 knots. Turning back around to the north-northwest, west of Adak at 20 to as high as 30 knots there, especially south of the chain. And along the west-southwest coast, 35-knot easterly gales within Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, 7 to 8 foot waves. Easterly 30-knot winds, St. Matthew down through the Pribilof, 14 to 16 foot waves. And then offshore easterly flow of 30 to 35 knots out of Norton Sound, but there's ice in place. There could be some movement of that ice westward. And on Wednesday, 40-knot easterly gales within Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay. It makes it hard for that ice to hold anywhere, even if it could form. East-northeast gales, 35 knots, St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George. Waves 17 to 18 feet there. And then the easterly offshore flow down a little bit than what it was on Tuesday. Out of Norton Sound and off the Yukon coastline, 25 to 30 knots, with that ice still having the potential to work its way westward. Across the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island and off of the western Seward Peninsula, look for easterly winds of 25 to 30 knots. As we come up through the Chukchi Sea, we find easterly winds north of Point Lay. All the way along the Beaufort Sea coast, easterly winds of 25 to 30 knots. Still could be some blowing snow in areas, especially around Kaktovik. And then on Wednesday, we continue to see easterly winds of 20 to as high as 25, 30 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. So still potential for some lighter blowing snow in that region. As we go down through the Chukchi Sea, look for east to northeast winds, 10 to 15 knots, but picking up to 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. And then as we drop on down through the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the northeast at 20 to 25 knots off the Seward Peninsula, but as high as 30 knots from the east along the north side of St. Lawrence Island on Wednesday.